Have you ever wished you could go back and say one more thing, just one, before the moment passed? If I Could Say One More Thing is a space for those unfinished conversations, unanswered questions, and stories that never quite found their ending. Here we explore the what-ifs and other possible new endings, not to change the past, but to understand it better, to find peace, or simply to satisfy the ache of curiosity. Sometimes, closure comes from not forgetting, but from imagining what could have been. What happens when we stumble upon something from our past that still holds weight in the present? In this episode, we explore Michelle's story. It's a story about the quiet power of words left unsaid, and how revisiting them, no matter how late, can perhaps offer a different kind of goodbye. It's a story about memory, missed moments, and the healing that can come from imagining what might have been. The letter was old, its edges worn and feathered, like the pages of a well-loved book handled too many times, never quite put away. She had found it inside a book she didn't even remember taking down, one of his books, her father's books. A paperback so worn it practically sighed when she opened it, and there it was, his handwriting. That same slanted script pressed into the margins, an audience of one in mind. Then the letter, her own handwriting. 16-year-old her, still naive enough to believe that writing things down could force them into existence. The sight of it startled her, like hearing a song from a forgotten mixtape, one that instantly transported her back to a version of herself she barely recognized but still hum along with. She had almost forgotten she had written it. Almost. But the past is nothing if not patient. It sits quietly, wedged between the couch cushions or tucked into a forgotten book, waiting for the perfect moment to ruin your day. She could see herself at 16, pen pressed hard against the page, writing it in a fever of need for answers, for clarity, for something she already knew she wouldn't get but demanded anyway. Because 16-year-olds are nothing if not ambitious in their emotional chaos. For years, she had convinced herself she had let it go, that it didn't matter, that she had outgrown the questions. And yet, here it was, a voice from the past demanding to be heard. Dear Dad, I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't know if I want you to, but I have to write it because something in me will not settle. Because I have tried to move on, but there is a thread, thin but unbreakable, that still tethers me to you. You left, that much is true. One day you were there, and the next you were not. Mom said you had died. I have never been sure whether or not I believed her. I have never been sure whether or not I want to. I think about our last day together. That day at the beach. I think about how we built a sandcastle, your hands pressing the damp sand into the walls that would never hold. I think about the drive home, you singing along to that Billy Joel song on the radio. I think about how sure I was then that you would always be there. I wonder if you ever thought of me, If you ever turned a corner and felt something catch in your throat, a memory unwinding before you had the chance to brace yourself. If you ever walked into a bookstore and stopped just for a moment, thinking that maybe I had stood in that very spot just hours before. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to forget you, but I never could. I don't know what you would say to me if you could, but I know what I wish you would say. That you loved me, that you were sorry, that you tried. Love, Munchkin. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. The letter felt weightless in her hands now, as if the years had chipped away at its substance, eroding its weight like waves smoothing a stone, until all that remained was the shape of what once was. And then she turned it over. There in the margins was something else. His handwriting. Her father had always filled books with his thoughts, observations, half-finished ideas, notes that started with great enthusiasm and trailed off into ellipses. He was less of a disciplined writer and more of an enthusiastic scribbler, forever jotting down things only he could decipher. She remembered the stacks of notebooks beside his bed, the loose pages stuffed into drawers, the way he would pause mid-sentence to scrawl something that would never make sense to anyone else. He had once told her that stories were a way of saying things you couldn't say out loud. And now, after all these years, he had spoken. Munchkin, there were days when I almost called you. I would dial half the number and stop, breathing heavy in the silence. I would stand outside your school at dismissal time, my hands deep in my pockets, and then walk away before you could see me. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you would be better off without me. But the truth is, I was afraid of what you would think of me, of what I had done, of what I had become. I do not know if you will ever forgive me. I do not know if I deserve it. But I need you to know I loved you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. Dad. She sat with the letter in her lap, the book open beside her, his words curling into the silence like smoke dissipating into the air, lingering just enough to be felt but never fully grasped. The answers weren't enough, not really. They offered no grand resolution, no sudden rush of clarity that wiped away the years of longing, but they were real, ink on paper, a tether to something she had thought was lost, and maybe that was enough for now. And as the words settled, so did something else, a slow, creeping understanding, an unspooling thread of forgiveness that had been wound too tightly for too long, constricting her in ways she hadn't even recognized until now. It loosened with each breath, not vanishing, but shifting. No longer a knot, but a ribbon, something that could move, stretch, maybe even be reshaped. Tears welled, unexpected, unbidden. She traced the ink, his ink, the same hand that had once steadied hers as she learned to write. He had always been there, not in presence, not in the ways she had once wished for, but in the quiet places, in the stories she told herself, in the voice that whispered through the pages of her own life. And she had been there too, living inside his words, the unfinished sentences he had left behind, the notes spread into margins. The answers weren't a cure-all. They couldn't rewrite the past or mend the empty spaces left in his absence, but they held weight, evidence that she had not been erased, that love, however flawed and fractured, had still existed in its own imperfect way. And maybe, for the first time, that would have to be enough. And that's where our imagined ending leaves off, offering a glimpse into what it might have felt like for a daughter to face the absence of her father and the silence left in the wake. This story was a way to give shape to unspoken feelings, to explore the space between abandonment and forgiveness, grief and healing. But the heart of this story isn't fiction. It's real. Up next, you'll hear a conversation with the person who inspired this episode. While names and a few details have been changed to protect privacy, the emotions and the journey are entirely her own. Here's my conversation with Michelle. Michelle, thank you for being here today and for sharing your story with me. I know this isn't easy. How are you feeling as we start?
Well, a little nervous, a little exposed, but I guess that comes with the territory when you're digging through your old wounds.
That makes complete sense. Your story really stayed with me. It's something so many people can relate to. This longing for words we never get to hear. That's actually why I chose to tell it through a letter. A letter is one of those most personal things we can receive, but when it's never sent, well, it becomes a question that we never got answered. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? What was your relationship with your father like before he left? Tell us a little bit about him.
He was larger than life to me, but not in the ways some fathers are, though. Not the kind who scoops you up and swings you around. No, he was quieter, always in his head. He used to write in the margins of books, filling them with half thoughts like he was having, conversations with himself. I think I was always trying to be part of that conversation, to be honest. But there were moments, small golden moments, when he was really there. I remember one summer at the beach, how he helped me build a sandcastle, his hands pressing the sand, shaping it, make it into something real. I remember thinking, this will last forever. But then the tide came in and the castle was gone by morning. Maybe that was the first lesson in how nothing really lasts.
That image, it's so vivid. That moment of you and your father building the sandcastle, it was such a beautiful moment. In fact, I just had to include it in the story. But when he left, how did you try to make sense of it?
At first I believed my mom. She told me he had died when I was about 10, and I clung to that because, what else was I supposed to do? But then I'd hear a song on the radio, something he used to hum, or I'd see a man in a bookstore with his same slouch posture, and something inside of me would whisper, what if? I started to imagine scenarios. Maybe he had amnesia, like in those soap operas. Maybe he was a spy and had to disappear for my safety. I think it was easier to believe in impossible stories than to believe that he had just left. That he had just, left me.
As kids, we try to create narratives that make the pain easier to bear. And in a way, I think that's what the letter in the story was about. Giving you a version of that narrative where he reached out, even if it was only in words. When you listened to the story for the first time, what was your immediate reaction? Did anything surprise you?
I guess the depth of it, the way you captured things I've felt, but not really put into words. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that. The letter, well, that letter, that hit me the hardest. Because even though I never actually found one, I think I've always been searching for it, some proof that he's thought of me, that he regretted leaving. That was the part that really got to me.
I remember wondering, when I was writing it, if giving you that letter, fictionally at least, would it bring a sense of closure? Or if it would just open more questions? How did it feel for you?
Both, I think. The story gave me something reality never actually did, a moment where I got to hear him, to know what he might have said if he had the courage, and that does help. I mean, it kind of fills a gap I've carried for years. But it still doesn't change the fact he wasn't there, and that he missed birthdays and graduations and heartbreaks, that I spent years talking to a ghost, trying to fill in the gaps myself. I guess closure isn't a neat, tied up thing. I mean, it's messy. It's knowing you'll always have questions, but choosing to live without the answers, I guess. But it also makes me wonder. Again, what if? What if I had gotten that letter? Would it have changed anything? Would it have made the missing years any easier? I don't know. And I guess that's the hardest part, the not knowing.
That uncertainty, it's something I think a lot of people carry in different ways. And yet, through the story, you were able to engage with it in a new way. Do you feel any differently about your father after hearing it?
I think I see him more as a person now. Less as a shadow or a wound, and more as a deeply flawed, scared man. I mean, who made the wrong choices. I mean, the story made me sit with his humanity in a way I actually hadn't before. And weirdly, I think I feel less angry. I mean, not angry. I mean, he's still left after all. But maybe now I can let go of some of the weight I've carried. Maybe I don't have to keep looking for answers that don't exist.
That's really powerful. I couldn't have said it better myself. But let me ask you this. If your father could hear this story, what do you think he would say?
I think he would cry. I think he'd see himself in it and it would hurt. But I also think he'd be grateful. Because someone finally gave him the words he never found himself.
And if you could say one last thing to him, now, what would it be?
I think I would tell him that I see you. I mean, I get your fear, your regret. I see that you were flawed. I see that you weren't some villain I made up in my head. And I do forgive you. But I still wish you had stayed.
Sometimes, growing up means realizing that the people who hurt us weren't villains, just flawed, human, and often carrying their own pain. But that doesn't erase the ache of being left behind, especially as a child. If Michelle's story resonated with you, you're not alone. So many of us are still trying to make sense of the things we never got to say, the goodbyes that never came, and the chapters that feel unfinished. If you have a story of your own, something you've carried, questioned, or wish had ended differently, I would be honored to help you explore it. You can send your story requests to sayonemoreThingpod@gmail.com. Thank you for being part of this conversation. And if today's episode moved you, please follow the podcast so you won't miss any future episodes. We have many more stories to tell, and maybe even one just for you. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.